that in all of this, the African minds are not sitting down collectively to debate and articulate what the African interests are and what would be the best ways to advance them. We are going to the marketplace as individuals. And Charles was laughing at the villages. The villages are superior. When villagers are going to the market, they collect together the cost of transportation and go together because they know that that's how the margins will improve. But these Africans, everybody is going at it on their own, and it's too costly, and you can't leverage. We're failing to leverage our continental capacity and existence.
Good day, everybody. I'm Ferial Hafaji in Johannesburg with the Bad Natives podcast.
This is Robert Kaushenge coming to you from Kampala, the bad native who is living amongst frogs.
This is Adeswagi Osage, and I am actually in Abuja today for a few more hours.
Charles Onyango Obo in Nairobi.
Adeswa, why are you so low? You don't sound like a good Niger woman.
You know, because we're back in National Assembly, I had my first day yesterday, so I'm conserving all my energy for today. We had 9 people change parties yesterday, and we had 5 different moments of silence for victims of different terrorist attacks. Very long, draining start to the session. So I'm conserving my energy for the 360 members I'm going to face today.
Good luck.
Charles, what's top of your mind this week?
Well, other things, but something very funny happened. You must have seen the Kenya President William Ruto was holding a rally in the western part of the country, and someone threw a shoe at him. The in the fashion of what they did to George Bush when he was in Iraq. But yesterday something very unusual happened. There is this opposition politician who says, having a shoe thrown at you is such a demeaning thing. You are better off if they throw a stone.
But Charles, the interesting twist to that, and I've seen it in Uganda, is when an incident like that happens, and then the influencers come and try to spin the event. So I was seeing Itumbi trying to claim that 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 incident that appeared on the screen was just a content creation by a guy. There was no actual shoe thrown at the president, and that he was inviting the owner of that phone to come and learn how to make content. And it reminded me, we've got a Ugandan minister who, unfortunately, well, I don't know if to say unfortunately or not, who happens to be a friend of mine, but he's made it his business to give a spin to some of the outrageous statements by the first son of Uganda. So there's this very unfortunate situation where he arrested Bobby Wine's bodyguard and then shaved his beard and humiliated him by trying to teach him the language that the president speaks, that the president's family speaks. So this guy tried to make the light of this by saying, yes, people should be taught different languages in Uganda. That's a good way to go to school. It's a good thing to learn. And we've gotten to the ridiculous now. So anyway, that's where our propagandists, that's how low our propagandists have shrunk. I think I need to set up a school, Comico Alley School of Propaganda to teach people how to say. Anyway, back to you, Furio. You don't have our
Thank
problems.
You. We have your problems over in South Africa. My colleague Rebecca Davis at the Daily Maverick, she began to track and to, in fact, try to purchase a group of nano political influencers. And she found that it's really, really easy to do so. Because of high youth unemployment, you can hire your own army of propagandists. And I found the study quite fascinating. It's a Pan African study.
Oh, and they're very cheap,
How cheap are they,
Yeah.
Adesua?
surprisingly cheap for, really depends on it depends on the size and their audience, but you can get them tweeting things that whatever you want them to tweet from as low as 50,000 naira, which is like what, $35, $30.
Well,
Same thing
it's a
here.
mean.
Hey?
And that's also what the Russians did. They found out that it was cheaper for them to hire Africans than to create their own content farms in Russia. So they just stopped doing propaganda themselves and just brought it here and outsourced it because they're like, oh, they're so cheap. We
Oh,
don't need all
wow.
this technology.
Right.
So this week, I thought we might start by chatting about BRICS. The BRICS Plus grouping is regarded as a new multipolar, largely of the global south group of countries. In South Africa, because we are the S in the BRICS, a really small partner, but one that's quite influential. There's a lot of excitement about BRICS. We have a BRICS ambassador, etc. And I guess one of the things that had been assumed until now, Charles, is that as you begin to lobby for the remaking of the Security Council, that first seat would go to South Africa. In fact, not so easy or so quickly, said certain new members of the BRICS countries. Do you want to share that with us?
Yes, there was a BRICS meeting, and the 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 BRICS, with some success, have been pushing the case for an Africa seat on the permanent UN Security Council. And before Ethiopia and Egypt joined, the view had been that the seat should go to South Africa. Now that they have expanded it, they had a meeting and they couldn't issue a communique because Ethiopia and Egypt are opposing the seat going to South Africa, which 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 is very indicative of a couple of things. But I think one of the things is we now realize that the BRICS, actually, it's not a highly structured organization. Its rules and procedures are not yet very entrenched, and we begin to wonder if they don't move on this very quickly, they could actually be in disarray. But it is interesting that it is the African members who are opposed to South Africa taking, the permanent seat. If Nigeria was in BRICS, I'm sure even the Nigerians would have protested.
I am looking at Adesua with a side eye. Adesua, don't ignore me. I am looking at you because I want to hear what you think of of the Nigers. Um, but perhaps while Adesua thinks how to retrieve Niger, Charles and Furio, I think that Africa, the African psyche, suffers from an incredible or an unbelievable sense of self sabotage. Every time we an opportunity provides itself for us to step forward and create our own platforms, we blow it because one, Trump has ripped up the whole world order. The Europeans have their union. The Canadians have their country. China has hijacked ASEAN and is driving an Asian agenda. The AU is where Africans should be going to strengthen their institutional capacity in the New World Order. The guy who was elected as the new chairperson of the AU has disappeared into oblivion, is nowhere to be seen. And yet, this is when he should be lobbying the African powerful countries to say, guys, how does AU respond to the New World Order? How does AU reorganize itself? All you see is individual presidents making noises about we are going to control our own resources. So what if you, Mahama, in Ghana, say you're not going to allow your resources to be taken? The Sahelians are pushing their own agenda. There is no cohesion. There's no sense of creating institutional cohesion. Instead, we are running to BRICS. BRICS is not going to rescue us. This is the time when we should be looking inwards and saying, okay, the AU, what are the institutions of the AU that can immediately give us quick wins? One of our strengths is our financial institutions seem to be gaining traction. So you'd be looking at Afrexim Bank, at ADB. Some of our telecom infrastructure is quite good. So we should be looking at places, even how to make AFCTA work, or how to drive the regional bodies and make them more effective, building on the SADCs, the EACs, and so on. Instead, what I know is happening is you have individual African countries trying to see if they can cut a deal with Trump through Elon Musk by giving Starlink free play on their in their countries. So I think that again, by rushing to BRICS, we have missed the opportunity to build a true African institutional existence that can guide us through the new world order. And unfortunately, you don't have leadership of the caliber of Kwame Nkrumah, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Sekou Toure, who could pick up, or Julius Nyerere, who could pick up immediately on this and stake an Africa.
I often speak to African Union colleagues and make exactly these points of asking, where are you as this world is reshaping? Why aren't we moving through you or hearing you or feeling led? And they in turn come back and say it's because the media and political pundits or analysts don't properly cover what's happening in the AU, and that we haven't amplified or given it the space to exist in exactly the ways that you're suggesting, Robert. Charles Adesiwa, what's your view? Do we do well by the AU? Do we try and cover it properly, or is it in fact this big lacuna, this place in the world that hasn't quite yet lived up to its promise?
Well, the it's I mean the election to the AU Commission chair was very well covered, and perhaps they are right that that is that that is it. We will it will probably get a lot of attention in another 5 years when there is another election. Actually, the the only other time where the media gave a lot of attention was around 2014 when the whole African Union was aroused around the case of then President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy at the ICC. Were really aroused, to protect these two gentlemen. You know, there was an explosion of Pan African solidarity and nationalism. After that, it didn't happen. Which actually then raises the question that if Yusuf, the new chairman, in fact, there was this interesting thing. I saw a photograph when I don't know, there was some big yes, it was uh, Kenya's former prime minister who ran against him, Raila Odinga, was in South Sudan trying to resolve the issue of the arrest of Riek Machar, the first deputy president, and South Africa was bubbling. They showed him somewhere in Addis opening a canteen. Inaugurating a canteen. So perhaps you Robert, you said he is invisible.
No,
It's probably maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they should have elected
but but
Raila.
exactly.
But
But Charles,
you are right. They don't get a look in. So in many ways, we in the media have to bear some of the responsibility.
no, Charles, I refuse. I completely refuse to grant that excuse because we must tell people what they are. Part of this is, by the way, that incident you talked about where Africans rallied to back Ruto and Kenyatta was driven largely by individual African leaders who dressed up in AU colors. Because Museveni was the first to fire that shot. And he said we should stand up as a continent. Let's look back. When has the AU, I mean, the problem is, first of all, it's part of is there the method of operation. If there is a problem in Sudan, you send IGAD instead of AU. If there is an issue of the new world order, instead of going as AU, individual African countries are running to BRICS. AU needs to be consistent in the way it approaches. I mean, look at EU. The European Union is very consistent in the way it approaches its matters. So the problem with with your colleagues, Firio, is that they're just employees. They're just there for a salary. They're not convicted about the work that they're doing. They don't. There is no ideological conviction. And Charles, I would like to say this: the last time there were colorful characters around the AU. Thabo Mbeki, Jean Ping, uh, Zuma's wife, I forget the name.
Nkosazana,
Exact
Gaddafi.
Gaddafi. Yes, that's when you had colorful African leaders who took their continental responsibility. When Kagame was driving the reforms agenda and so on. So and then there was that guy from Mali. I think he was called Konare. Now, these guys, as personalities, they've brought their leadership skills and capacity to give heft to AU. So, in the absence of colorful, dynamic leadership, I mean, or even Meles Zenawi at the time. I mean, these were powerful intellectual drivers. If you really want attention and coverage, Charles is going to hang me for this one, but I'll say it. Give the AU chairmanship for 3 years to Isaias Afewerki, and you will see what will happen on the. He'll- I mean, what we're
I'm
having
willing to
now.
grant it if that's what will bring back life to the organization. but but
You-
but Phil, what is the view in South Africa? What how do the South Africans see South Africa's role in BRICS? Because there is an argument to be made that the South needed a vanguard organization like the BRICS to slice to carve out a piece of the action for ourselves. But of course, as Robert said, the situation has changed. So what is the view in South Africa?
The view in South Africa is that, especially with the Trump trade wars, but for the longest time, we've nurtured our membership of BRICS and are very, it's something that is regarded with some pride in popular discussions, especially since the BRICS summit was held here. But you'll remember that we also host the Pan African Parliament here. So it's vitally important that you work through the AU. And I'm sure that our diplomats were very surprised by Ethiopia and Egypt's positions, and that talks must be continuing because, as you know, when the G20 gets here in November, and remind me to share a little story in the parting shot with you at the end, you do have to see a united position, especially insofar as the reformation of the international architecture, of which the Security Council is such an important part. So I do hope that we get to a position. And not at all do I think that role must go to South Africa. I'm sure Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya have as much authority to stake a claim to who shall be the member country on the Security Council.
Egypt only comes to Africa for football. They shouldn't take it.
Adesiwa, a view from you, please.
Sorry, I've been, my connectivity is so bad today. In the capital, wow, the light is back. Well, look at that, perfect timing. View
We
from
can
me.
see you now.
You can see me now. View from me. It's weird to see Egypt and Ethiopia work together. I thought they had problems or issues with as when it came to the Nile. I don't know if I've missed this part of the conversation, but I didn't think they were particularly friendly. I also think that there is sometimes in Africa a sub-Saharan versus North Africa divide. So, I'm not surprised that Egypt is trying to hold this position because even though we like to see ourselves as one continent, I definitely think that there is a divide when it comes to sub Saharan Africa and the rest of the continent. And that also goes into our geopolitical relationships. Nigeria is also obviously vying for this seat. The vice president spoke about it at the UN General Assembly last year, particularly because of Nigeria's role in ECOMOG and ECOWAS and the liberation movements across West Africa. They feel that they need this seat. But something that's very interesting about the BRICS communique is that they wanted it to be a permanent seat for Brazil, India, and South Africa. So even though
I would
they
give
pushed back
in
on,
all honesty, I would give that position on the Security Council to either Cape Verde or Comoros, because they're small countries. There's no, yeah, because you see, in their smallness, they will never take unilateral positions. They will definitely come back to the AU and consult on a position. We should not give the Security Council seat of Africa to any of the big African powers. It should go to a small country that has proven that it can actually listen and take into account the continental interests. Because what's going to happen is if you give it to any of the bigger powers, once they are already there, they will start to horse trade for their own diplomatic leverage. But I also think that that position should be rotational. You occupy it 5 years, AU votes the next country. We
No,
shouldn't have
but
permanent.
you can't run it like a village cattle dip.
No, Charles, the
But
village, Charles,
here's the thing,
Charles,
because part
listen
of the
fast.
complication
Charles,
is
the village financial circle it has better governance than AU.
I know it's fine. I missed
Yeah.
Bob's last joke,
so,
and I'm
so,
very sad
so
about that.
for me, Charles, that one I will not accept. We And this is why I am only saying that we should not give this position to big African powers, and it should be rotational. You are there for 5 years, you come out, non renewable, no term extensions, AU votes. We start with small countries. First, we give to Cape Verde. Number two, Comoros. Number three, Sao Tome and Principe.
But how is that different from the system they have now of rotational seats on the Security Council? And also, like, sometimes I wonder the
No, no,
utility of sitting on
no,
the
because
council
there's
anymore.
because the other rotational countries don't have a veto power.
I see. So it's rotating, but also
So
veto.
this week, so I wanted to ask you a question about something interesting I've been reading up on, and I had really interesting interview with the G20 Sherpa in South Africa. His name is Zane Dangle. He was saying that what's happening in the world is the rise of the middle powers, and this is something I've been reading up on. So they cut across north and south, they cut across east and west. These are what would have been regarded as emerging markets, but perhaps more a political concept. And I'm really interested in watching that begin to happen. Adisiwa, is this something on your radar as well?
Rise of the middle powers. By middle powers, do you mean like the UAE, Qatar? Do you mean the Middle East? Or
Some Scandinavian countries, some African nations.
Oh, definitely. I think what we're seeing is a new positioning. It's a significant shift, at least in my whole lifetime.
Charles, thoughts about this?
yeah, it's and it's not the way it's not the way you one would have thought the world would go to, because we are so locked into a world of either one hegemon or duality, a power on the left, a power on the right, and maybe a power in the center. And so now you have this collective of emerging powers, so in the Gulf you have the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, you are beginning to see India in Asia. The Indias, the Indonesias are beginning to emerge. So it's an interesting time, and when you look at particularly what has happened with Donald Trump's tariffs, it has used the process. And so now you see ASEAN, for example, that Bob mentioned at the start, it is beginning to shift and get some ideological, clause which it didn't have previously. And I think the world will be the better off for it.
I, I think Captain Lugard, wherever he is in the universe, is laughing because he was the greatest articulator of indirect rule and its most effective implementer. I think what's going to happen with is people think globalization is dead. No, I think globalization is going to come back through the middle powers, and the big powers are too broke to finance imperialism, so they're going to depend they're, they're going to depend on these middle powers. They're going to outsource responsibility for the rest of the world to these middle powers. So we're going to have another Berlin conference, Charles, where the big powers, China, Russia, and America, and perhaps Britain or France, sit down and say, okay, Turkey manage North Africa, UAE and Saudi Arabia manage Middle Africa, in Asia, Vietnam please manage Philippines. So the mid so the middle powers, Charles, I'm betting my goats on this, and I'll give them out. These middle powers are going to be asked to perform the role of imperial master in return for guarantees from the superpowers. And in return, they will spend their money, but the superpowers will get the biggest chunk of this. The
But
superpowers
I
can no
I
longer.
feel like I feel like you're being too down on us. I think many countries on our continent are middle powers, and it's an alignment with the AU. It's a place we ought to be, like we
Furio,
ought to be in BRICS. I
Furio,
think to see it only as the
Furio,
next form of colonialism is perhaps too
Furio.
down.
6 years ago, I sat with a Western intelligence officer, and he told me how they divided up the African continent. East Africa, or Eastern Africa, was left to the British. South Africa, not Southern Africa, South Africa was American direct sphere of influence. The French would continue doing their thing, and Kenya would be shared between the Brits and the Americans. Zimbabwe was a British issue, and then try and manage Zambia out of the Chinese hands. So, whether we like it or not, it is happening because these guys have a long term strategic outlook of acting in unison. Yet we, on the other hand, because we tend to be clients of these big powers, are unable to look beyond just immediate regime survival and a bit of national stability. Until we can rise above these municipal thought processes, there is no way, Furio, we're going to be what you expect.
Charles.
No, but Bob, I mean, you're right. But the other thing is that you have to buy. You have to buy your influence because it isn't as if these because the clout of America, the clout of the Europeans was because they put money on the table. But now they can't. These they do. The UAEs are able to put more money on the table uh, than uh, than than the Americans. India is able to put more money on the table. South Korea is able to put more money on the table. Even Japan. So if you are not paying, the Ugandans have this very uh, it's there's a double entendre to it, but says when you're selling samosas or mandazi that uh, you kind of want to squeeze it to see whether they there is anything inside. Eh? So they say that it's only people with money who are allowed to squeeze
To
the
not to
samosa.
squeeze, just to pierce.
Yeah,
You pierce the middle to see if there is a meat
yeah.
in the.
So then, in that context, how do you read that meeting this week in, I think it was in Dubai with the UAE rulers, again trying to negotiate a peace deal in Sudan?
Yes, and because what has happened, we go back to the question of interest, because if you see what the interest of some of these middle powers, particularly from the Gulf, their existential issue is food security,
Yeah,
and they need stability in the fertile parts of Africa
yeah,
to to grow their food. So there is an objective interest there. So you you are going to see that even where the West would think that this is a hopeless case, you will see them coming in, trying, coming at the problem from different directions until they find a way through. So it's so for them, apart from, there is already this a kind of a distribution of power already to them, but beyond that, that sharing of spheres of influence, they have an objective interest, and to them it is food on the table.
yeah. The only addition there, Furio, that I would put is that even to do that, they know they have money, but they also need the military muscle to enforce it. And to do so, they need the backing of superpowers. So for me, it's interesting that Trump's first official visit, or whatever it is, as president to the Middle East is not even to Israel. It's to these countries, and to the extent that these countries can be guarantors of American interests at their own cost in these parts of the world, I mean, Charles, it will go beyond food security. They will outsource other things to them, and these guys can invest money back home. I think it's a win-win situation. Again, back to where we started, Firio, that in all of this, the African minds are not sitting down collectively to debate and articulate what the African interests are and what would be the best ways to advance them. We are going to the marketplace as individuals. And Charles was laughing at the villages. The thing, the villages are superior. When villagers are going to the market, they collect together the cost of transportation and go together because they know that that's how the margins will improve. But these Africans, everybody is going at it on their own, and it's too costly, and you can't leverage. We're failing to leverage our continental capacity and existence. We can make all the noise about keeping our natural resources. We have a third of the natural resources of the world. It doesn't matter. What we don't have is leverage.
So, Charles, as we begin to wind up, you wanted to introduce a new concept of governance, or consider it. It's certainly not new, but you've given it the interesting title of the familiocracy. Tell us more.
No, actually, this one, let Bob get in trouble first.
Yes, of course. And I'm sure he has
But
a lot to say here.
the idea is that if you look over the last 10, 15 years, and more so today, that the form of political transitions are presidents navigating their sons, and none of them has pushed a daughter yet. Their sons to take over, and it's really becoming almost normal now that in the countries which are republic, the sons are you know should should succeed their fathers. It's as if we are back to the age of monarchy. But Robert, over to you.
I said this before, and I'll repeat it, that we've not looked critically at the political culture from which our current politics is emerging. It's true, Charles, that there is an element of monarchy or monarchism in this approach because traditionally, really, the only institutions we knew before the colonial establishment was monarchies. And then the colonial administrations came up as monarchies. Now, why is it that you can do that in underdeveloped or corrupt or small countries, but you can't do it in a South Africa, you can't do it in a Nigeria, you can't do it even in an Ethiopia or a Somalia or an Egypt? In Egypt, the experiment failed. Libya, it failed. Why did it succeed in Togo? In part because some of those countries, like Gabon has been able to share the GDP across a small population. So the stakes of who is president were not that high because there is a bit of benefit. You could say the same thing to a certain extent in Equatorial Guinea, even with the level of looting. There is an element in which people have. So if you look at countries like the Middle East, where familiocracy has been more successful, they've cut a bargain. The elites have cut a bargain that first you will keep your familiocracy, but you will deliver a certain social benefit to the population. Now, that is not going to be possible in some of the contexts in which we are. So, what do they then do? They invest in surveillance and utmost violence to force you to accept family rule. The problem with that is it will end in who is willing to take on the most violent approach to politics and remove the family. And the places, Charles, where that has been successful is there's always also been an elite bargain. The son of the president takes over, but the sons of other political players also get something. It's not a unilateral family affair. And I think that is one of the crises facing Uganda. That that attempt is seen as a unilateral approach to the exclusion of others who may want to cut a bargain. Now, that creates a problem. If you don't, so the Eyademas, the Nyasingbes in Togo, it's because the establishment reached a consensus and said, we can agree that let Nyasingbe become the president, but the rest of us have something we can continue to do as part of the political establishment. You don't have that in Uganda. You didn't have that in Angola, and that's why Isabel dos Santos failed. You didn't have that in ANC, and that's why Zuma also, with all his best attempts, failed. Um, Mugabe in Zimbabwe, same story. So I think, Charles, to go back to answer to your question for me is it's very specific political contexts, especially of small countries where it is possible to oppress everybody or people are superstitious, or the GDP has been distributed and the economic grievance is very limited, and that the arguments are over who should occupy public office, but not whether or not we have bread, whether or not there's employment and opportunity being created. So I think a familiocracy can only succeed in two contexts: absolute oppression, where you beat people into accepting your successor from your family and kill some to get rid of them, or you accept that you will concede a genuine benefit across the board, including for the elites to have something so they have a stake in your continued rule. Absent those circumstances, forget a familiocracy. It will be contested violently.
But
The fact that,
may I
sorry.
bring in something? Is I think it what we're seeing is a misogynation, especially in South Africa, which I guess I know best. Is in the struggle against apartheid, you had political families, the
Mhm.
Sisulus, the Mandelas, the Kathradas. This is where the political struggle, being part of a movement, does filter into the entirety of the family. Where it becomes a problem is when that is recast into patronage, and that's what happened under President Jacob Zuma, where where his son Duduzani and his daughter Duduzile, they are the twins, and they're the twins of Kate Monshaw, which was his second, who was his third wife. They sought to cast themselves as being in that political tradition of service, but when you began to study their accumulation, they were building businesses close to the Guptas and to other networks. And that's how I understood that something good becomes something negative. And I wonder if that's what you see as well, or if your view, Bob Charles, is that it's always a negative and patrimonial practice.
Yeah, it has become so because it goes to point, if if you look at them, and you look at Togo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, all these countries generally tend to be resource rich, so they have they they the argument has been made that they get these resources to trade with. The other problem is that invariably you see there has been a decline in democracy in this, in these countries. You could add Uganda. Uganda, ever since it discovered oil, it had a considerable impact on the trajectory of the country. The succession and all these things, that we have had a big decline in democracy. And you're also right. It tends to be very, 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 if not misogynistic, at least patriarchal, because it tends to reinforce the male line. I was if you take a country like Djibouti, sorry, yes, Djibouti, the guy has got a very different approach. He has married off his daughters. To he's like an ancient king. He's marrying off his daughters to rival clan, you know business people, and and giving pa- you know and using that to craft a governing coalition. So yes, that the almost whichever way you look at it, it's been regressive, but it's just surprising the number of Tinubu's son, Nigeria. So if generally there are about 15 or 16 countries in Africa where we are seeing this tendency, and it's it's hard to ignore that something nefarious is underway.
Really interesting. I can't believe it's time for parting shots. So, Bob, you go first.
Yes, and I'm taking it from Charles. Charles posted this thing where he said Trump is taking away $500 million from the African Development Fund, which is a concessional lending arm of the African Development Bank. I am tabling my own proposal in my right as an African that all money stolen by African people in political office be given a moratorium. So all of them forgiven, and then they bring that money and put it in the African Development Fund, and whatever return comes, it pays them back. Because that's so we forget about money laundering. Trump has torn up the foreign, I don't know, corruption act, whatever. So it's okay now. So tell the African guys, you bring your money to AFDB wherever you've hidden it. We won't ask which one of you it belongs to, and it can never be frozen. Bring it, put it. Furio, you could easily raise a fund of anywhere between 20 to 50 billion dollars for the bank if you gave them that option. I mean, these guys, I was telling Charles, I saw a documentary. Gaddafi died. He was worth 144 billion dollars. Nobody knows where that money went.
Some of it
Mo-
is in South Africa, I have to tell you.
there you go. Mobutu, 30 billion. And that list goes on and on and on. So if that money was, and it's buying apartments in Dubai, why are we building the Dubai real estate business when we can build the African continent? So, Charles Furio, talk to the big people.
I'm taking that to the AU. That must be
Yeah,
their big
yes,
campaign of
let them give
presence.
a moratorium to all stolen money, no questions asked, put it in AFDB. We will give you a return on that investment of 3 to 4% for 20 years. You are guaranteed. There was no cost of you obtaining that capital. It's fine. Your grandkids are sorted. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the way to develop the continent.
You beat that parting shot, Charles.
No, 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 I can't. No, mine is something that happened at the Kenyatta National Hospital. They they pulled off a wild fast in medicine, and so I have to read this right. It's very difficult to cram. They performed the world's first transhumeral targeted sensory reinvertation, TSR. And what does that mean?
In
In simple
English,
terms, it's a procedure where they reroute nerves from an amputated limb and connect it with healthy skin, enabling the brain to sense touch, temperature, and pain from the missing limb. So so it's if your hand or leg is amputated, the edge becomes numb. So these fellows have pulled off the world's first procedure in which they redirected nerves, and now you can feel. And in this day and age, to read an African country pulling off something like that,
wow.
it's so joyous. In fact, it goes back to it's almost the moment of Christian Barnard in South Africa, who did the world's first heart transplant. So
Yeah,
this
Exactly.
this gave me a lot of joy.
wonderful.
There
Great.
can be no better parting shot than that one. So it's
Yeah.
left for me to say, Bad Natives, please like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy our podcast. See you next week.